Hey everybody, and welcome to the third and final part of my long-term review of my 2022 Husqvarna TE150i. So as you can see, this bike is all sorts of torn apart because I am doing a 100-hour refresh on pretty much the whole thing. So this is an opportunity to show you guys just how screwed up and unreliable these TPI bikes are. And I'm just kidding. I'm actually filming this after I already did the top end, and I will show you guys what that looks like inside. Spoiler alert, it looked fine, but you can keep watching the video to see what it looked like. Some of the other aspects that I'm addressing are the suspension, so I'm going through all the bearings and making sure those are looking good. They all have the original grease in them. I have not taken them apart. When I bought the bike, I just could not be bothered. So it's the original grease, or as people say, there's no grease in them and all that kind of stuff. And I should have greased them, but I didn't. So we'll take a look at just how bad those are. And once again, spoiler alert, they were fine. So you can keep watching the video to see what those look like. And the rear shock is out to the shop, or to a shop, getting serviced as well. I serviced the forks myself because it's easy. The shock, I just didn't feel like doing this time, so I took it to a local guy here to take care of. Alright, so hopefully you guys can see this. This is the plug that just came out of the bike. It probably has about 40-ish hours or so. So I do a lot of slow technical riding. You can definitely see that this plug is pretty black. And the bike has been starting to run a little burbly. So it was probably time to replace this plug either way. Alright, so we got the top end all apart. You can see here, there's a few things that I kind of wanted to look at. First of all, the rod, no up and down play, it's really tight. The bottom end is nice and oiled, so it's probably kind of hard to see on camera, but there's a good amount of oil on kind of everything in here. So that's really good. So everything's looking pretty good here. So let's take a look at the actual piston and the cylinder itself. Alright, so here's the stuff that came apart. So let's take a look at the piston. The piston looks really good actually. So it's got some wear on it, but that's kind of normal, at least from what I've seen. It definitely is pretty black, so it's not the blackest piston I've seen, and this is before I cleaned it, so this literally just came out of the bike. It's not the blackest that I've seen, but there's definitely a lot of carbon on top of this. So these new TPI bikes, they just run rich, I guess. And especially with me doing a lot of slow technical riding, this is pretty understandable. Other than that, 100 hours looks pretty good. Alright guys, so here's the cylinder. I got it pretty cleaned up now. You can see that, you can still see the cross hatching. There's definitely some lines, so you know it's not brand new, but it's looking really good inside there. I did go ahead and clean up the power valve a little bit, so it was a little bit sticky, and it was actually these rotary the rotary portions of the power valve, so it's not the main flap, but the little rotary things on the side that were a little bit sticky. So I just took it apart and got it cleaned up, lubed up. You can see it's pretty lubed up here, so I just used a little bit of gear oil, the stuff that I'd use in the Husky gearbox, to clean that up. So it's pretty much ready to go back together. It's looking really good. New piston and everything, and a couple other things that I just wanted to mention, just for reference. It's different. It's going to be different on every bike, but just so you have a point of reference, just in case. So my I don't remember what the technical term for it is, but when the piston is at the very top, it was pretty much flush with the top of the cylinder. I think it's like the Z or the X distance in the manual. I don't remember off the top of my head. But I couldn't get, using a flat edge, I couldn't get really any feeler gauge that I have underneath it. Spec is from 0 to 0.1 millimeters, and the smallest gauge that I have is 0.03 millimeters, and that wouldn't go under there. So it's pretty much 0. You can even see underneath it. Now, part of that might have been because there was some carbon on the piston, but there really wasn't that much to affect it. So just for reference. And then the base gasket that was in the bike, this is the original one. So I measured that. That was around 0.65 millimeters. And I measured it in a bunch of different places, since obviously it's all kind of chewed up. But that's approximately where it was, between 0.63 and 0.7 ish, so about 0.65. So that's kind of what I'm going to try to match with my new gasket kit here. And then once I put everything back together, I'll measure the clearance on the piston and make sure it's around the same that it was, or at least in spec. And this is the head. Again, I haven't cleaned it. Again, decent amount of carbon. It's not the dirtiest. There's no signs of detonation or anything like that. So it looks pretty good. So there are already some really good videos online about doing the top end on a 150. But most of them that I've seen are for a carbureted version. I haven't actually seen any for a TPI. But there's really not too much of a difference. So I'll just run through a couple things real quick here. This is my first top end on this bike, so I'm by no means an expert. If you have any comments or suggestions, definitely leave them in the comments section. I'm always willing to learn something new. But just to go over it pretty quickly, so there are a couple plugs for the injectors, and I'll show you what that looks like on the head. There's a plug for the temperature sensor. I don't think that is there on the carbureted models because it doesn't really matter. And then there is a crank sensor hose. Those are really the only differences that you have to be concerned with on the TPI bikes. Nothing really else TPI related has to come off. Everything else is pretty much the same as on the carbureted version. And here's the cylinder. So these are the TPI related bits. So you got a couple injectors here. You probably can just take them off. I decided to just leave them on here. You can take the whole thing off. This is the fuel line that goes to your fuel tank, which you have to disconnect anyway, obviously, since you're taking the tank off. But you don't have to undo any of these non-reusable clips. You can just leave them on, and you can pull the cylinder with all this stuff attached. You can probably remove the injectors if you're trying to completely clean this or hot tank this or whatever. I decided to leave them on because there's some O-rings here and I don't want to damage them or cause an air leak or fuel leak or anything like that. So you can do it either way. Again, if you have suggestions, definitely leave a comment for why it might be a good idea to pull these off. All right, so we're moving on to the next step of the servicing here. Doing the linkage bearings, just taking a look at them, inspecting them, putting some grease in there. Also going to do this bearing on the brake pedal as well. It's not really notchy, but I'm sure it could use a little bit of lube. And then also going to do the swing arm bearing, again, just to inspect it, grease it, as well as the steering bearing as well. So I know a lot of people say that you're supposed to take all this stuff apart and grease it when you first get the bike. I could not be bothered to do that when I first got the bike. So this is the original bearings. This is the original grease in them. They look pretty greased to me, to be honest. So I'm not sure how necessary that is, especially if you ride a lot and you're probably going to do this every year or so anyway, or every couple of years. But my bike's a year and a half old. It's I bought it in 21, a summer 21. So, and I use a power washer because again, I cannot be bothered to clean it a different way. And yeah, these look pretty good. So I'm just gonna grease them up and put it back together. All right, so this wraps up my long-term review of the 2022 Husqvarna TE150i. If you haven't seen the other 3 parts of the review, make sure you check those out. There's links in the description below. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions or things to point out where I did something wrong, by all means, feel free to leave a comment. I'm always eager to learn new things. And hope you enjoyed the video, find it useful. And I am looking forward to getting this bike back out on the trails. So almost time. So hopefully the weather's getting warmer where you guys are as well. And hopefully you get to do some riding soon.